Hello everyone, I'm Colin Cadet. Today I'm going to make this really cool templating jig thanks to a suggestion from Mark. And at the end of the video we're going to try it out and see how well it works. But let's start off over at the table saw right now. Now the first thing I need to do is create a couple of strips for the sides, and I've decided I'm going to make them 3/8, and rather than try and measure them, I'm just going to use one of my measuring blocks, and that's perfect, and that's done. The next thing I need to do is make my base plate, and I'm not even going to measure it because it's going to be the width of those two measuring bars plus the jigsaw base, and that's it right there. Before I go any further, I want to talk about the pivot point. So eventually my jigsaw will fit on top of this, and I'll have some sides on here, and the blade, of course, is going to go through here somewhere, and there's also going to be a place where I need to put the guide pin or the pivot point. And there's a variety of things that you can use for pivot point. Now, I've seen people using doweling, and doweling would work fine, but the base that I have here is fairly thin, and I'm just afraid even if I put doweling in there and glue it, I'm just afraid it's going to move around, or knowing me, I'll probably break it off. So there's another thing that you could do. This is not quite as elegant as what I'm going to do, but it would still work fine, and that is to get a bolt. Of course, it wouldn't be this long. Again, you would drill a hole, and these washers, basically, you could tighten them right up to the baseline, and you could use this as the pivot point. And you could even use some smaller washers here so that you got a much finer cut. So that's another option, and you could bolt that down on there and it would be nice and tight and it would hold very well. Now what I'm going to do, I have some bits and pieces from my router, and what I'm using is the very smallest bearing that I have for my routers, and I don't even know what size that is, but if you go to a router place, they will have bearings, and whatever the smallest they have is what you can purchase because there's only one size. Then I have it in this bolt, and it actually fits perfectly inside this bolt, and on top of that, there is a little washer, and if you look closely at that washer, you'll notice that it has a little tiny lip on it, and that little lip is to fit on the inside of that bearing, and that's so that when you tighten that down on your router, that bearing still spins freely. So what I've got a couple of bolts here that I can put on, and this one bolt, I don't know where it came from, but it's actually a little bit smaller than the bearing. So when I put that in there and put the bolt hole through there, I can tighten it up on top here. So now that bolt is going to be tightened right through, and the bearing will still be allowed to spin. What I'm going to do now, I've just mixed up some 5-minute epoxy because it's a lot quicker gluing, so I'll be able to work along a little bit quicker. Now what I want to do, I'm laying some plastic down here because knowing me, I'm going to get some epoxy on the base of this, and I don't want my jigsaw to be permanently glued to that base. So I'm going to use that, and hopefully that will allow me to lift it off without any problem. Okay, that's sat for a few minutes, and it's nice and tight in there. So that comes out easily. Oh, look at that. Plastic comes out just perfect. So the next thing I need to do is to drill a hole, and that will be for the blade to go in. And that's what the blade looks like. So I'll just have to measure that with the blade out, and then right in front of it I'll need to drill a hole, and that will be for my bearing to go through, my bolt and my bearing. There, I just took that little piece of wood over to my grinder and just ground a couple of little holes in there that'll fit in. And now I can attach that. Well, now comes the moment of truth where we actually get to try this thing out. Now, this jig is not going to go around corners, or at least acute corners, very well because it's linear. And you can see, because it's long like this, and you can imagine when you're going like this, sharp corners it's not going to do. So it's going to be mostly straight. I'm going to start off with a straight one. Now I've put a new blade in here, a new sharp blade, and that's because when you use a dull blade, the blades tend to deflect, and that's where you get sort of angled cuts. So I'm going to plug this in, and let's try our first cut here. Okay, I'll be honest with you, I already did one test and it worked pretty good, except I drifted away from the template over here. So this time I'm going to hold on to this end of the jig here so that I push it against the top piece, which is my template, and see if that'll do a little bit better job. Well, I drifted again a little bit there. There we go. That's better. That ran all the way through. And of course there's a little bit of a lip there, and it's going to be rough because the underside is where the good cut is going to be, because these teeth are angled upwards. So that looks good. Well, that concludes my video on making the templating jig for the Jigsaw. And you know what? It works okay. It's not a fabulous jig. There's other better ways of doing templating. I would typically use a router to do that. It'll make a more accurate and a cleaner cut than this does. But you know, if all you have is a jigsaw and you need to do some templating, this is one option that you might want to look at. It does take some practice, so you'll have to have some extra wood around. But in the end, it does work, and it's another option for you to look at. I'm Colin Canet for WoodWorkWeb. Thanks for watching.